Hello chums, this is a book review and the book I'm reviewing is about Spike Milligan, but it's primarily by Clare, a psychologist, because it's called Depression and How to Survive It. So it's quite a serious book and a lot more serious than I thought it was going to be. I thought it was going to have a bit of comedy, which there is some comedy in there, but it's all in the context of depression. So it took me a good deal of time to read this book. That's my first kind of criticism, if you can call it that. But if you're going to read it, just go in prepared that it isn't a comedy book. It is actually a book about a serious subject, and I think it covers it quite well. This was written back in the 90s. So Spike Milligan, for those who don't know of him, was a British comedian, one of the great comedians. He wrote the Goon Show pretty much single-handedly, and that's covered in this book as well. So what it talks about is mainly through the eyes of Spike, the scope of a psychologist looking at Spike Milligan as a patient. It kind of uses that as a structure to talk about mental illness and mainly depression. And Spike Milligan had manic depression, so it talks about that manic depression as an illness, as well as what are the kind of causes, and what are the effects, and how is it dealt with? How do you cope with that, and what kind of help is available? So it's a really serious subject, but it's nevertheless really interesting. As a book, with regards to just reading it, it's only 200 pages long, but it takes a lot longer than I thought you would think it would take for a 200-page long book because of the serious content. It's mainly from a scientific kind of approach. So I'd say this much of the book is pretty difficult. This book, part of the book, is easy because the back end of the book talks about how you can cope with depression and mental illness and what kind of treatments are available. So it's a lot more pragmatic than a lot of the other part of the book, which is kind of evidence-based and talks about different kind of experience that Spike Milligan had, as well as other patients and what other kinds of illnesses. So looking at the chapters then, we have Spike Milligan, the patient, a bit of an overview. What is depression? So we talk about what it actually is, and some of the ways people misinterpret what depression is, and the incorrect idea that everyone's come across it. Come along, pull yourself together. Smile, it might never happen. Those kind of phrases, that kind of nonsense, and which is really not helpful. That's not a way of getting someone over depression, for example. So it talks about that. It talks about how common depression is, and it's very common. The causes of depression. So it can be something that's occurred, such as a death. It could be a job loss. It could be something else entirely. It really could be many things. The causes of depression. It's very complicated, I think, is the take-home message, so it needs to be taken seriously. So what caused Spike Milligan's depression? He's got manic depression, so that is a different one, but then standard depression. I don't think there is a standard depression. That's another common misconception, that depression has an array of what works. Like if you have your own depression, for example, if I had depression, well, let's look at my depression. Well, you can think of causes, but when you're actually in it, it's like being at the bottom of a hole and not being able to dig your way out. No amount of sympathy can help you. But yeah, we're going back towards the kind of tail end of the book. So it talks about manic depression and creativity. That is interesting because there's this concept that do you have to be manic depressive to be a creative person? There's a lot of people that have had manic depression, Stephen Fry and that, and they're obviously creative people, but do you need the illness in order to have the creativity? So there's a lot of talk about that, about having one without the other. Women in depression, so there's a lot of things to take, to unpack there. As a man, a lot of things I hadn't thought about, so it's not just biological aspects to women, but also sociological things, such as the way that society interprets women and what they expect of women, and the kind of pressures that are put upon women which aren't put upon men as much, if at all. And then the treatment of depression. This is the interesting bit, how to cope. I think the take-home message with how to cope and the treatment is, if you know somebody who's depressed, the first thing to do is to listen rather than talk. The first thing you shouldn't do, and I've been guilty of it, is do not give them advice before you've listened to what they've had to say. It's all unique, and I think the first protocol is going to be guiding them towards some kind of counselling, the doctor, getting them into that route of recovery to get them help. And it also talks about drugs as well. So let's take a look at an extract from the book. So this is Manic Depression and Creativity, the conclusion. So is manic depressive illness the price Spike Milligan pays for his comic genius? The nature of his humour strongly suggests a crucial link. So yeah, he does have I remember a scene where he had some hung Boy Scouts in the background. So yeah, I mean, his humour I'm not sure I get along with, but yeah, I could see that. A patient support group of which his patron contains many people who are not particularly talented, yet who have the disease. One thing of which he is certain, however, is that his comic genius is not worth the manic depressive agony. Yet that begs a crucial question: is the evolutionary purpose of the manic depressive gene in its role in creativity? For as evidence and Milligan's own life history suggests, manic depression and creativity are indeed causally related, then the question, why does manic depression exist, may have an answer. So there may be some reasons behind it with evolution. But yeah, but what remains unanswered, however, despite psychiatrists' efforts since the middle of the last century to explain it, is the nature of creativity itself. And among the many thousands of people who suffer from manic depression in Britain at the present time, there has only been, and there is only one Spike Milligan. Manic depressive clearly is not enough. So I think when they're talking about creativity, there's a whole section where he suggests the whole idea of creativity. That's just me eating food in the background there. Is that people might suggest, well, what's the difference between having a mental illness and being creative? Making a sketch for comedy. And sometimes there's a bit of a fine line between it. But I mean, it's obvious when you see somebody rocking in a corner or saying that they're Jesus, but what about people who are hiding it? Because another thing about depression is people with depression can seem to be very happy at times, and they can hide it from you. And it's like many cases of friends saying, but they never seemed sad, there never seemed anything wrong with them. But there's another book that I'm reading by spin doctor Ali Campbell, associated with Tony Blair. He had 10 years of solid creative effort where he was working with Tony Blair, Gordon Brown and the Labour government. That's the UK. So he was helping the Prime Minister with their role and with the press office and all that business. So he did a lot there. But that was 10 years of solid work, and what he said was at the end of it, he built up all this stress and pressure, and it just all came out, and he had the most serious amount of stretch of depression he's felt in his whole life as fallout from that. So that's a case of people hiding their emotions and the pressures. But I think the most important part of this book by far is the last part, physical treatments. So it talks about treatment and what you do if you know somebody with depression, if you have depression. I think this has been very helpful. I remember when I had depression myself, I kind of thought of it as being ups and downs. I don't think I was a manic depressive, but I remember a book saying the higher the highs, the lower the lows, that kind of thing. So I made a conscious effort to level out the curve. I think that's when I went into, this was when I went to university, that was fine. And I think I did do a conscious effort, that, believe it or not, for people who went to university with me, that was the calmer side of me at university, as much as they may not believe that. but you have to flatten the curve. And alcohol was kind of an emotional crutch as well through that period. But I don't think there was many kind of periods that were really down. So I was consciously thinking that, you know, with the ups comes the downs. So that's part of manic depression. And they talk about physical treatments. This is a very interesting part. So in relation to manic depression, you've got a tricyclic antidepressant. You've got other ones. You've got monoamine oxidase inhibitors. I'm not sure what these things do. I've read this, but I'm not going to talk about them much. Lithium, that's an interesting one, because what was that band? You know what I'm talking about, Nirvana, and with the lead singer committing suicide. I know his name, I can't bring it to mind, but he killed himself. He had a song called Lithium, but the song was actually about him finding God when he was right at the bottom, and that helping him to get out of it by having a belief. And lithium, I don't know whether he was actually on lithium or not. There's talk either way on the internet. None of it is truthful, what I've read, but I don't know. Someone probably out there knows. It doesn't matter anyway. But lithium, the way it works, it was discovered in hamsters, I think. Was it by a psychologist? For some reason he was injecting hamsters for something completely different. But what he found was that it calmed him down. So he thought, hey, genius, I think he might have been Australian. Hey, genius, well, let's try it on manic depressives. Yeah, that's a great idea. Straight into human trials. I'm sure it wasn't. I'm sure there's a process. But the book kind of reads that way. And what he found was that it calmed people down. It had a calming effect. The thing is, with lithium, it's very interesting though, because if you need to have the right amount of lithium ingested into your bloodstream. Otherwise, it doesn't work at all. Too little lithium doesn't work. Too much lithium doesn't work. Ideal amount. So it involves a lot of blood tests, but when it does work, it works, and it certainly works for people with manic depression. But one of the problems is that people get better, and then they believe, well, I'm better, I don't need the drugs anymore. Then they come off the drugs. So you may come off the lithium, you may come off the tricyclides, and then if you don't come off them, if you don't step it down, if you don't work with your doctor, with your medical professional when you're coming off them, then suddenly you get a sudden drop back into depression, and then you could end up committing suicide, reaching a 10 on the suicide scale, according to Ali Campbell, and he used a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being you're essentially about to commit suicide, 1 being you're uber happy. Might be useful for people out there. But yeah, it talks about treatment, and some of the misinterpretations, the way the general public think about the use of drugs. I'm not a medical professional, but this guy is a medical professional. He says a combination of using drugs as well as like talking treatments, like psychoanalysis, CBT, something you can get on the NHS. I think he said there's a combination of the two, drugs as well as the therapist, professional, and it's all tailored to each individual. Everyone's going to be different. Every depression is different, every single one. There's no such thing as a general depression. There's no such thing as snapping out of it. That's not going to happen with depression. When you're in it, you're in at the bottom of the hole. You can't see a way out. There's absolutely no way out. It's an abyss. You need help. So that's why you need a medical professional to help you, not just a GP who isn't trained in. I mean, there is danger, and I think this book, it doesn't really discuss it in enough detail, because I know people that have been just put on antidepressants like that, bang, wham bam, thank you, Tam, because of a doctor that has not been trained up in depression, and they should have been referred to a professional who was. And then the problem is with antidepressants is once you're on them, you need to step up to it, and some of them don't come into effect for a number of weeks, so it could be 2 or even 4 weeks before they start actually working. So there's a danger zone where the treatment could treat the symptoms, so the illness, the lethargy, and because of that, it's not actually treating the thoughts of suicide. So you've got a danger zone where you suddenly have the energy to commit suicide where you didn't have before. And this was in a book that I read. I don't have it. It's a blue book. I think it was for medical professionals about antidepressants, and it said about that danger area where there is a danger with antidepressants that they can allow the sufferer the ability to commit suicide. So I think there needs to be a lot of serious thought and with a good kind of medical kind of pathway to make sure that the checks and measures are in place to make sure that doesn't happen. But obviously I think it probably still does happen. It's not perfection. It's a very difficult scenario, especially with people suddenly coming off them. So if you're on an antidepressant and you think, I have this belief that drugs are bad, don't do drugs, I'm okay, but also there's a point as well where you're about to commit suicide, and I'm not going to say don't ever go on antidepressants because I think there's going to be a case for using them. However, you need to be making sure you're getting the right advice, get a second opinion if you really want to, but at the end of the day, treatment is the essential part of it, and I think drugs can form a part of it. However, other people say the opposite. So this is a book written in the 1990s. Obviously, the medical profession still uses drugs, so there is still a reason for their existence. So I'm not going to jump down that rabbit hole because I'm not trained up. But what I found very interesting was electroconvulsive therapy, ECT. So, like the electroshock therapy. And I thought, but Jesus, are they really still using that? But apparently, at least Anthony Clare in the 1990s was saying that it still has a use. So to me, that sounds shocking, because I think I'm thinking one flew over the cuckoo's nest, and I've got all these negative thoughts about it. But yeah, it appears it is still used. So at the end of the day, it's still a treatment, and just because I don't understand it, I'm not a medical professional, I shouldn't have such a negative thought about it. But obviously it's going to shock people if they find out that their loved ones are suffering and they're being treated in this way. But nevertheless, it's still one to bear in mind that you might come across. So yeah, it's certainly worth reading up about it and understanding what that's all about. And I think this book is quite useful for that. It puts more of a positive light on things, but not entirely, It talks about the pros and the cons of each. So it's very good, it's very useful. And I think the most important bit is right at the back. Depression, how to cope with it for friends and relatives. And I don't know well, I do know, but I don't know because if I knew somebody who's depressed, I now know the answer is listen to them. Don't do less time talking, more time listening to, because I know what you want to do, what I want to do, what everyone wants to do is tell them that magic pill, what they need to do to get them out of the depression. I really want to do that, but I'm not qualified. And of course, most importantly, is they want to be listened to, and you want to refer them to a professional who actually can help them. You can talk about your own experience to give them some positivity and say, well, I had this that occurred to me, I got out of it this way. But I think the problem is, looking back at my own depression, which is even difficult to talk about now, but because it's a mist, because now I've not felt it for a long time, stable relationship, good job, thankfully things are going all right family wise, who knows in the future, so yeah, it's difficult. But what would be a trigger? Anything can trigger you to go down that hole, and not having the right support network. But remembering it just seems like an alien world to think of it now. It's like being absolutely alone and having no one who will help you. So if you've got someone there who's listening to you and taking you seriously and saying, at least acknowledging that you are depressed, acknowledgement, I think that can go a long way and help you to think, well, maybe there's a way forward, give you hope. And I think that's what you want to give people. And tell them that they're not alone, above all. Read the end of this book, just get it from a library, read the how to cope bit, role of relatives, just read it in the library. It's very short, it's very easy to read. And I'd say the first part of it, the medical parts, very difficult. Could be 2 out of 5 as a reading experience, because it is difficult. It's not easy. But it goes from 3 to 4 out of 5 right at the end. I know I've said this about a lot of books, but none more important than this one. If you can get hold of it, I don't know if it is in libraries, if it's if it's published anymore. But there's a lot of books that are very useful on this subject. But the take-home message is just listen to anybody who is feeling a bit down, feeling a bit sad. You know, they're not going to come out and say I'm depressed. That's not going to happen in most cases. But maybe. I mean, I'm talking to myself here. Maybe listen a bit more when somebody says, you know, they're having a bit of a bad time, or they sound a bit down. Their voice sounds different. It sounds lower. It sounds more flat. You know, say, mate, you know, how's it going? You know, what's on your mind? Go and meet them. Drive out that way if they're not down the road. Go and find out. Talk to their partner. Ask them if they're all right. You know, do what you can. But books like this are very useful for that. I know it's 3 out of 5. The back end of it is certainly worth reading, but the rest of it very difficult. Whoop. Anyway, I hope that's helped. Like and subscribe, and let's all stay pinky positive if we can possibly can. But have a most excellent day, and look after yourself, look after each other, be excellent to each other. Thank you very much for watching so far. Sorry it was a bit long, but it's quite an important one.